Ingvild from Stockholm University, Yale University, and the Center for Economic Policy Research. And the title of her talk is going to be a research agenda on measurement, inequality, parental decision-making, and child development, from household decisions to global comparisons. As usual, the talk is going to be for 1 hour, 45 minutes of presentation, and 15 minutes of Q&A. So in the last 15 minutes, you could unmute your mic and you can ask your question directly. But during the seminar also, you can post your question on the chat. And if need be, we will pass it on to Ingvild to clarify. Then after the seminar or after the webinar, Ingvild has kindly agreed to meet those who would be interested for further discussion, and we will share a Zoom room at the end, and you can join and further. You are welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. And I have to announce a change in the title of my talk, although I will talk about also the announced title within this talk. So I will talk about my research agenda very broadly, but not, of course, everything I do, but I will focus on what we announced that I would present, which is a large program in Tanzania called the Kizazi Kijacho, which means the new generation. But then I will also talk about Fairness Across the World, a project that is further away. The reason is simply that I wanted to have the data ready to look at treatment effects for you and have an interesting discussion about results. I don't have that yet, so that's why I don't want to spend the whole presentation on that project. But let me talk about, first of all, my research agenda and the background for these two papers that I will talk about. So my research agenda more broadly has always been concerned about income inequalities. And the traditional approach that we usually use when we measure inequality would be to select a measure of real income and represent its distribution by either a Lorentz curve or a summary scalar index, such as the Gini. Now, in my research, I've been concerned with three limitations of this approach. So first of all, that real income typically is constructed so by adjusting for some price deflator, or we want to get at some real income, and then there are challenging getting at the right deflators. I will not talk about that part of my research agenda today. Then when we do traditional inequality measurement, we also implicitly assume that we are interested in some comparison to an egalitarian distribution, namely where everyone would have the same income. But that's not necessarily the normative foundation that people would have. It's not necessarily what people care about. People may care about a different distribution. And I will talk about a paper within that agenda today. Then it's the last one where the Tanzania program fits in, which is the within household decision-making and inequality, and more broadly, how households and parental decision-making would influence child development, adolescent development, and female empowerment, and also father engagement. So the main focus today will be on a large project with 60 countries, experimental projects. We have an experiment in 60 countries, which is called the Fairness Across the World. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about the announced project, the Kizazi Kijacho, and give you a teaser of what we will have from that project in not very long. Not today, but in not very long. And Beth Kayer is my collaborator. She's here, so she can answer. She's leading this project with me. She can answer any questions you may have in the chat about this program. So what are we interested in? We are interested in household decision-making. So in order to understand making and the consequences for child development, we focus on new measures. So we need proper measures, and for some of the measures we then suggest also novel ways of measuring that. We want to discuss parental decision-making, and the RCT that I will explain is actually going to try to support the parental decision-making when it comes to child development. We want to measure child development. We also want to know how we can improve on child development. And we want to study female empowerment and father engagement related to upbringing of children. In the collab, we have a long list of collaborators on this project. So Beth Kayers, I already presented. Then we work with Professor Atanasio, Professor Betancourt, Bornstein, Elisaria, Jervis, McGeer, Prabhakar, and Ringdahl. But then we have subgroups working on different parts of this project. So let me say what we do in Tanzania in short. So we will have a nationally representative study of families. So we recruit in utero. So, and then we follow these families till the child is at least 3 years old, but we hope to follow them longer. We need funding for that. And per today, it's 3,240 households, and it's nationally representative in Tanzania. Then we have one RCT ongoing. We have some data. We have cross-randomization with another RCT plan. So we want to try to understand the whole sort of life cycle of child development, which means that we want to understand complementarities and across different programs at different times in the child's life cycle. We have a parenting intervention where we focus on the nurture and care framework. That includes health, nutrition, responsive caregiving, opportunity for early learning, and safety and security. Some of you know that well, but now I've said it. So for the cash treatment, we want to compare this to a program that is already in place in Tanzania, but not rolled out universally. So the government of Tanzania, they have a cash transfer scheme called TASAF, partly supported or mainly supported by donors. And we have a cash transfer, and the government really wants to learn about this cash transfer scheme, and we have therefore calibrated our cash transfer scheme. Child allowance is what we call it in this program, to that TASAF scheme, the same scale. Then we have a combined treatment, sorry, so I didn't put it here, but I will make that clear later, where we reduce the amount of cash, and we have also a parenting scheme. So we want to ask the question, would it be better for the government to not only focus on the TASAF scheme, but spend some of those resources on supporting existing health workers in the countries to support the parents? Okay, and then we have a lab in the field. Directly, not only through revealed preferences from observational data. So of course, it's again a revealed preference approach, as you may know from my previous work on using lab experiments. We are getting at revealed preferences, but in a much more controlled setting where we can actually get that particular parameter in the utility functions of the households or particular members of the household. Okay, so this is the RCT, the study design, where we have a control group. And we have a UCT unconditional cash transfer group, and then we have a parenting group, where half of and I know it's small, the text is small, but in part of the parenting group, we also give cash transfers. For the cash, you don't need to focus so much on the varying amount here, but we have one TASAF amount that we give, as I said, calibrated to the amount that the government proposes. That is now randomized into mother targeting and father targeting. So we want to know whether it matters, whether it goes to the mother or the father in the house. Okay, so I know this is a bit quick, but I would love to talk more about it. So this is just to present you with the infrastructure and the agenda. Okay, so what are the main research questions we want to get out of this RCT part of the Kizazi Kichacho? So Kizazi Kichacho means next generation in Swahili. And in the RCT of that program, and the first RCT, I should say, of that program, we want to understand whether a scalable version of parenting interventions which is in this setting, a completely integrated into the existing governmental structure, could work to promote child development. So we know well these very successful parenting schemes that have quite intensive treatment, right? So you have some programs that would have visits every week, they would last for 2 hours, and so on. And thinking about those programs, I would think almost it's a proof of concept, at least for the Tanzania setting. It wouldn't be possible to implement that at scale, neither because both because we don't have the resources to do that financially, but also we don't have the human capital to do that in place, right? So what we really want to test here is a scalable version of a parenting program where we use the existing infrastructure, we use the existing health workers, and we give both digital support and secured payment for their work, which is the same payment they should get from the government anyway, but we secure that they get it. And then see with a curriculum through an app, a digital solution, where they can both store data, but also get prompts about what to cover. We want to understand whether that could also have an effect. So then we also want to ask, is parenting plus cash better than just cash? And then we want to understand, is it better cash to give it to mothers or fathers? So we've heard anecdotes saying, and some studies also showing in some contexts, that it's better to target mothers than fathers, at least for child development. But we will ask that question openly here because it is actually mixed evidence, and also the evidence is scarce. So we don't have evidence for all contexts and at scale for this kind of argument. Okay, so then we want to ask 2 questions. So is the maternal argument valid, is what I just said. Would it be better for children and for the households if we target mothers than if we target fathers? And then is the empowerment argument valid, meaning do we empower women by targeting them? So of course, we could also justify a focus on targeting mothers by saying it will actually empower mothers. Again, we don't know how that works, particularly in this parenting schemes, because we know sometimes overburden mothers by putting a lot of responsibilities on them if they already have a lot of responsibilities. Okay, so then I just wanted to mention also that this RCT is not only a standalone effort. We want to use mixed methods. We have a process evaluation ongoing, which uses qualitative methods. We have a costing effort, and we want to look at how this program would fit in the Tanzania context, whether it's feasible and whether it's affordable. So this is just to mention that it's sort of not a standalone RCT. We try to sort of understand whether it could potentially be scaled and be implemented in the Tanzania setting. Okay, so then I also wanted to mention that we have, and I already said it briefly, that we have plans of cross-randomized with new interventions. So childcare later, and also some parenting groups potentially in the villages for children when they are older than 2 years, so after these first 1,000 days. And yeah, so there we want to understand how different programs and timing work and whether there are complementarities between these different efforts. Okay, so the program is in Tanzania. We meet with mothers, but we encourage fathers to also be there when we come. And when I say we, it's not me, of course, it's the local health workers and their supervisors sometimes. So, and this is the app we provide for them. So the parenting program is provided through an app, which will prompt them with the curriculum that they're going through. And that is, of course, adjusted to the age of the child. So it's updated for every visit, both because the child is older, but also because the health worker would also put in information from the last visit, which would then give prompts about what is important for this particular family, this particular child to follow up in the next visit. Okay, so what are the main aims? The main aims would be to understand the process of child development. We recruit in utero and focus on the first 1,000 days. We want to understand the constraints to and drivers of parental behavior. And ultimately, we want to model household decision-making and outcomes. And we want to study how these policy programs can affect parental decision-making and child development. We have parental report using Creddy and MacArthur Bay.
There's a short question. Ingvild, if I could read it. Okay, Beth is answering. It's okay.
Okay, should I just go on?
Yes, you can go on.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so we measure nutritional status, so height for age, weight for height, and mid-upper arm circumference. And then we measure consumption choices, of course, with a quite elaborate consumption module. We focus, of course, also on investment in children, both time use, but also financial investments. And we have female empowerment measures, and we look at the maternal argument. And here is maybe where the novel measurement comes in to play in this project overall, but in particular, when we want to measure female empowerment, we sometimes struggle to measure that well. And we have suggested a new lab measure on that and validated that, and we're still working on that, on improving that. And we have new ways to measure maternal argument using actually a dictator game and other games that we know well from lab settings that we can use in this setting and see how well they predict actual behavior, in that sense, validate them, but also use them to measure behavior and preferences and the different parameters we need for the household decision making, the full model of household decision making. Okay, so that was like a speed presentation of that project. I'm sure Beth is happy to answer questions. We are also very happy to discuss it more after the talk in my Zoom room. We will be there, both Beth and I. So let me now spend the last part of this on another project, which is closer to sort of being final, where I have results to show, which is called the Fairness Across the World. So this is a bit of a change of scenes in the sense that I now talk about a different part of my research agenda. And it's joint work with Alexander Kappel, Erik Sørensen, and Bertil Tungeren, all at FAIR, the Norwegian School of Economics. And the main motivation, the starting point for this, was that we saw that there is large differences in implemented inequality across countries. And then there's a literature focusing to a large extent, I must say, on what we could refer to as the word populations, right? So the Western educated, industrial rich and democratic countries or populations. But that kind of literature would say that every society would need to justify its inequalities. And what Piketty says, this is just an example, he says that this is often justified by saying we need meritocratic systems, we can justify inequalities because inequalities, if they are due to merit, it's something people can find fair or justifiable. Now I will show that you'll see from these results that he's right. In some, he's mostly right for the weird populations. It's less true for the non-weird populations. Okay, so we also had a study before where we actually asked how important fairness views would be for federal elections. And this is a study that's already published, but it was in between United States and Norway. So we had representative samples in the United States and in Norway. And we simply asked them how important is fairness for federal elections. So most people said it's either very important or it's moderately important, both in both these countries. So when we started that study, we wanted to look at two countries with different levels of inequality within the OECD. In Norway and the United States, there are two extremes in the OECD distribution of inequality. Okay, so in this presentation, in this paper, Fairness Across the World, would be how do people across the globe, so no, it's not Norway and the US any longer, but across the globe, think about fairness and efficiency, and how are cross-country support for equalizing policies related to the will of the people. And where do people different? And does socioeconomic status, income, education, and gender matter for the views about what is fair? Then, of course, there's future work that I won't go into, but that would both try to explain where these preferences and beliefs come from, but also try to relate it more directly to labor market outcomes and feature we see in the labor market observational data in the country. So I would not talk about those two things. But what I will talk about is two stories that could justify inequalities. So often economists, we have been very concerned about this equality efficiency trade-off. So we say, okay, if you want to redistribute, it has a cost because it will be less efficient outcomes. You need incentives, you need inequalities in order to get to efficient outcomes. We want to push another story, which seems actually more important, at least in the data we have, which is that there could be unfair and fair inequalities. So there could be some inequalities that people find fair, and then there could be other inequalities that people find unfair. So in that way, your fairness view could actually lead to inequality acceptance. So I already mentioned this indirectly, that there's a preference side of this. So of course, the inequalities we see may be supported by differences in preferences across the globe. So people may have different inequality acceptance because they differ in how they trade off equality and efficiency, or in what they consider to be fair. And these differences could exist within countries and across countries. Then people may also hold different beliefs. So people may differ in inequality acceptance because they differ in their beliefs about how inequality comes about and how equality affects efficiency. So it could be different views on what causes inequality. So what kind of sources leads to inequality. So it could be that the poor would think that inequality comes about because some people are unlucky and other people are lucky. Could be that the rich think that inequality comes about because some people work hard and others do not work hard. And then, so that's an example of beliefs about the causes of inequality. There could also be, as I said, different beliefs about how equality affects efficiency in the society, how costly it is to. In this study, we will measure for 60 countries, we will measure preferences. So we will study real distributive behavior. So this is a revealed preference approach for representative populations in 60 countries. So we'll have them decide in identical economic environments, and we will control and randomly vary the source of inequality and the cost of redistribution. So we will know the sensitivity and preferences to the cost of redistribution and the source of inequality. On the belief side, we will measure beliefs about both the equality efficiency trade-off and the sources of inequality. And then we will try to relate this to policy attitudes. So we will relate the preferences and beliefs that we measure to whether people find existing inequality unfair and whether they support redistribution. Okay, so why is this a contribution? It's a contribution because it's a unique study of fairness preferences across the world. And it's the largest, we think, experimental study implemented in social sciences. You may challenge that. I'm happy to discuss it. It provides the first global study that jointly measures fairness preferences, beliefs, and policy preferences. And it provides insights on how fairness preferences and beliefs vary within and between countries that may contribute to explain global variation in policy support for equalizing policies, but also actual inequality. And we'll get to that, see if it actually relates to the implemented inequality as well. And then it provides global causal evidence on the importance of the source of inequality and the cost of redistribution. So that's the only causal claims we will make. It's on the preference side about these sources of inequality and the cost of redistribution. We had a pre-analysis plan. I won't go into that in detail, but it's there. So let me go to the study design. So we implemented a module in Gallup Whirlpool. 60 countries, most countries, Gallup would say that 1,000 would represent, would be a representative sample. Of course, we can discuss a lot what that means. It's representative on observables. And in some countries, we have larger samples. So in very large countries such as China, India, and Russia, we have larger populations. Well, sorry, we have larger samples. Then the module that we implemented with Gallup Walpole has 3 parts. So it has fairness preferences, it has beliefs, and it has policy attitudes. And let me go through the measurement in detail. Of course, this was partly encouraged by the Falk et al. Study, also conducted with Gallup Walpole. But what we have is an experimental study, which is different from that in 2 ways. So first, we have treatment analysis, which means that we can make causal claims. And second, we have real incentives. So we have real workers who are actually paid according to what these spectators decide. Okay, so these are the countries included in the study. And one thing is to look at the map and just see that we have a lot of countries, but also there are some green spots, but they are population-wise smaller. So we represent, with these 60 countries, we represent 80% of the world population. So these are the countries, and I've said all of that. So the design process, let me dwell on that a little bit. So we designed this in close collaboration with the Gallup Walpole team. One challenge, of course, that we had to work very closely with them, who are used to having harmonized questions across so different regions and parts of the world. And also in this case, we had to simplify quite a lot compared to the Norway-United States study that we were partly following up on for the preference part, at least, because, for example, the word inequality doesn't always make sense to very poor people. So I was going to Colombia to test this, and in poor regions, they wouldn't, inequality, the translation of inequality didn't make sense to all people, so we changed that to gap between rich and poor, for example. So this was very important collaboration we had with Gallup, who knows a lot about how to collect data in different areas around the world. Also, it was very important that we were in the field ourselves, testing out this in different parts of the world. So the research team was going to the field, testing it. And of course, the translation process, as you may imagine, was very extensive in the sense that we had to go to translate, back translate, and try to adjust so it had the same meaning in all contexts. Okay, so the spectators decide. So the spectators would be the representative samples in these 60 countries. So they would decide on actual earnings for other people. And we can call them workers. And these workers are not representative samples. So they are recruited through MTurk. And it's the same pool for all countries. They are real, they are there, they will be paid according to what the spectators decide. So that's what makes them important. Other than that, they are not important in and of itself. So they are there to incentivize the spectators. The spectators, and I've said this, were recruited and participating through Gallup Walpole. We had 3 treatments. So we had a luck treatment, we had a merit treatment, and we had an efficiency treatment. And I will actually read this out loud, which is the first treatment, and then I'll show how the other treatments differ. So the first treatment is, I'm now going to ask you to make a decision that will decide how 2 real people are paid for some work they have conducted. You do not know these 2 individuals, but they will receive the payment that you decide. Recently, these 2 individuals were hired to do an assignment that would be completed in a short time. They worked independently and did not communicate with each other in any way. They were both paid a compensation for taking part in the work. After they had completed the assignment, they were told that it was randomly decided that one of them would earn an additional $6 for the work on the assignment, while the other would not earn anything additional for the work on the assignment. However, they were also told that a third person could change how the additional earnings would be divided between the 2 of them. you are this third person, and it's now up to you to decide whether you want to change how the additional earnings are divided between the two workers for the work on the assignment. You can choose between some alternatives, and whatever you decide will happen. The two individuals will receive what you decide. How do you want to divide the additional earnings? Remember that that what you choose will be paid to these two workers in real life. And then and then one worker got $6 for the assignment and one got $0 for the assignment. Now, of course, the important treatment here is that it was randomly decided. It's in bold here for you. It was bold for them. Then I will not read the merit treatment. So this was a cross-subject design. So some people got the luck treatment, others got the merit treatment, and the difference is the source of inequality. So in this merit treatment, we say the one who was most productive on the assignment would earn an additional $6 for the work on the assignment, while the other would not earn anything additional for the work on the assignment. And again, you could transfer from the one who was most productive to the one who was not most productive. And the third one is what we call the efficiency. You could call it a cost treatment as well. And what we do here is, again, to have a randomly decided inequality, but then you can redistribute, but it's a cost. And that's modeled as an iceberg cost. So if you send $2, only one will arrive at the other individual, the other worker. So the wording is, again, it was randomly decided that one of them would earn an additional $6 for the work on the assignment, while the other would not earn anything additional for the work on the assignment. And then we have the same text as in the luck treatment, but then we say, however, there is a cost to transfer money from one person to the other. Only half of the money that is transferred will be received by the one who did not earn anything additional. You can choose between and again, they can transfer, but then some of the money would disappear. So in the luck and merit treatment, there is no cost of redistribution. So they can either leave it as it is. So again, something we learned from Gallup, that it's good to, if you want many alternative answers, you want to fork it. So you want to have just two choices at the time, or at most 3 choices at the time. So what we did, we first asked them, do you want to leave it as it is, or do you want to redistribute? And if they said they wanted to redistribute, we asked them whether they wanted to implement $4.5 and $1.5 or equalize, so that both got $3. Of course, in the efficiency or cost treatment, there is this iceberg cost. So if they choose to redistribute, they will have to choose between 3.6 and 1.2 or equalize, but then it's $2 for each of the workers. So what would be the important design choices? So we believe that it's important to have real choices so that the decisions that are made would have real consequences. We have the same pre-redistribution earnings in all situations. And we have complete information. So we give the information that is relevant for the spectators when they make this decision. And then we provide a simple theoretical to fix ideas. So you could think about the spectators choosing a distribution where they either just leave everything to worker A, who had everything initially, or they take part of that and transfer to worker B. And the utility function here is very simple because the spectators are not themselves part of the situation, so they're not stakeholders here, right? So they are spectators, so the only thing that can happen to their utility is that they get a disutility from either deviating from what they find to be fair in the sense of not giving what they find to be fair to worker B, or they can get the disutility because it's costly to redistribute, so they may shrink the cake. So these are the two costs, and here it's sort of modeled as a quadratic loss for these two costs, but of course you could model that in other ways as well. Here the M is what you find to be fair, and the Y is, as I said, the share you decide to give to worker B. So if you deviate from what you find to be the fair share, you would get the utility loss. And that utility loss depends on how much you care about fairness versus efficiency. And that trade-off between fairness and efficiency is captured in this beta parameter. So of course, if you put a lot of weight, I can maybe move here. So in the luck and merit treatment, there is no incentive to deviate from what you find to be fair, because there is no cost of redistribution. So C is 0. So C here is 0. So there's no cost of giving anything to worker B. So you would always just implement what you find to be fair, because then you have no utility cost here. In the efficiency treatment, there is a trade-off, right? So you can pay attention to what you find to be fair, but then there's a potential utility loss because you care about efficiency. And that, so then if beta goes to 0, if you care very little about fairness relative to efficiency, you wouldn't give anything to worker B in the efficiency treatment. Whereas if beta goes to infinity, if you care a lot about fairness relative to efficiency, you would just implement what you find to be fair again. So the same as in the merit and luck treatments. And then you can discuss different fairness views. I'll be a bit quick here, but you could think about egalitarianism as all inequalities, both due to luck and performance, are unfair. Meritocracy could be defined as inequalities due to luck are unfair, inequalities due to performance are fair. And libertarianism could be defined as we would accept all inequalities. So inequalities both due to luck and performance are fair. And then quickly on the beliefs. So we also listed the beliefs, and then it was a scale from 1 to 5. Again, we used this technique. So they chose gradually where to put themselves on the scale. We asked about some merit sources, and one sort of luck question. So the way we phrased it would be, in your country, one of the main reasons for the rich being richer than the poor is that the rich have been more lucky in their life than the poor. That's the luck belief question. Then the merit belief questions would say that the rich being richer than the poor, so the main reason is that the rich have worked harder or have greater innate abilities than the poor. So we think about merit factors as both working hard, effort, but also innate ability. So you can be born with more productive sort of traits. Then we also had a beliefs question on the cost of redistribution. So how costly is it actually to tax in your country? And that was phrased in the following way. So in your country, if the government increases the taxes that the rich have to pay, the rich will work less and invest less. And then last thing we elicited would be policy attitudes, again on a 1 to 5 scale. So we asked, in your country, the economic differences between the rich and the poor are unfair. And then you could agree or disagree or put yourself in the middle of those two positions. We also asked, in your country, the national government should aim to reduce the economic differences between the rich and the poor. Again, they answered agree or disagree on a 5-point scale.
There is a question that
Yes.
I can read it. I think it is on this part. In the merit treatment, ideally, shouldn't you also explicitly say by how much the most productive guy is more productive than the other? That is potentially important for fairness, isn't it? Or do you also measure beliefs about that?
Yeah, so we did not in this study. So what we will look at here is whether you accept more inequalities if it's due to productivity differences than if it's due to luck. We will not define exactly what the merit preference would be here, in the sense that we don't have, some of you may know about other work, which would have like a proportionality principle where you say, oh, what you get should be proportional to your efforts relative to others, for example, right? So we are not that specific here. We just say that you have meritocratic preferences if you are willing to accept more inequalities if it's due to productivity differences than if it's due to luck. I do agree with this comment in the sense that it would be interesting to know more nuance here, sort of what kind of productivity differences would lead to what kind of of inequality acceptance. So there's a lot here we could learn from that kind of nuances. It's not what we did here. But it is still true that a meritocratic position would be more sensitive, would have to be more sensitive to the productivity differences than the luck differences. I think it's still sort of, it's a broad definition, but it's still sort of a pretty clear definition, I think, of meritocracy. I'm happy to discuss that more towards the end in the Q&A or in my Zoom room. Okay. Reference side, what do we see? We can look at how many equalize. It's not what I will show you now. I will show you actually Gini index. So we can look at how much inequality they accept, these spectators. So X is now the income of worker A. Y is again the share of income of worker B as before. And then you can look at the absolute difference between those two divided by the total cake. So that would just be the Gini index for a two worker society. And when we do this for the luck treatment, we see that globally, actually, people accept quite a lot of inequality. So a Gini of 0.45. This is just pooling all the populations that we have. There is a striking treatment effect when going to productivity being the source of inequality. A lot more inequality is accepted in this global population. So there's a huge response to this treatment. Now, looking at efficiency, so now we have, again, a random process leading to inequality, but there is a high, I would claim it's a relatively high cost of redistribution. If you send $2, only one will arrive at the other worker. But the response is much smaller than for productivity difference. It's there, it's significant, but it's smaller. So then we can look at the heterogeneity. I have to be quick here, but we looked at income, education, and gender. We don't see a lot, but you see a tendency for the preferences to be sort of self-serving in the sense that for education, there are more people who are, so people with higher education implement less inequality in the luck treatment and more inequality in the merit treatment. We see a bit of the same tendency for income. For gender, I would say we don't see a lot of interesting differences. Okay, so then we can run through a regression analysis here, looking at the treatment effects. And we see that what really stands out is that the merit treatment effect is high, and it's higher than the efficiency treatment effect. So you read that in the first two rows of this table. You can control for characteristics or not, but this is the same independently. Then the word sample. So who are the word people here? Those are it's not divided by countries here, but it's actually the people who are Western. They are educated within the Western societies. They are industrialized, which in this setting means they live in an urban area. And they are rich. They're relatively rich, even within their own country, and they live in a democratic society. That this is about 10% of our sample. If you look at those people, they are responding much more to this merit treatment effect than the global population. If you look at the non-word sample, and you can see that these would not add to the total, so it's not those who are not word are not non-word necessarily. These are those who are not living in Western countries, who are not educated within their own country, are not who are living in rural areas, and who are not rich within their own country and would not live in a democratic society. And those respond less to this merit treatment effect. But it's still there, right? So they still respond. And there's a significant effect also of this efficiency, this cost in terms of efficiency of redistribution. Okay, so here, so in the luck treatment, we see a lot of differences in implemented inequality around the globe. So warmer colors here means more inequality is accepted, and colder colors, you see Norway, you see Canada, would implement much lower inequality. When you go to the merit treatment, it's much more similar what you see across the globe. So there are much more similar levels of inequality accepted in all countries. And you can see that the tendency, of course, is that you sort of warm up the globe, you accept more inequalities when going to the merit. These are the country differences. What is interesting here is that it's a lot of non-Western societies here up who would implement a lot of inequality, even if it's due to luck. And it's maybe the usual suspects, Norway and Canada down here. But maybe, like I wouldn't say surprising, but maybe less known result is that the world is much more similar when you have productivity differences as the source of inequality. So people living in different countries seem to agree more on the right level of inequality acceptance. Then to efficiency, we don't see the same kind of effect. It doesn't warm up the globe in the same way. The effects are much smaller. And again, in combination of the source of inequality being random and this cost of inequality, there is again large differences across countries in how much inequality you accept. One thing we find fascinating here is that the treatment effect for efficiency is in almost all countries smaller than the treatment effect of merit. So you see there are two exceptions here, but almost all countries falls below the 45. Okay, so let me rush through whether we can classify people into egalitarian people, meritocratic people, and libertarian people. So we could say that the share of spectators dividing equally in the merit treatment would be egalitarians. The difference between the share of spectators allocating more to the more productive worker in the merit treatment and the share of spectators allocating more to the lucky worker in the luck treatment would be the number of meritocratic people in a country. This is what I responded to the earlier question. And then those who are libertarian would be defined as those who, the share of spectators that allocate everything to the lucky worker in the luck treatment. So they would accept inequalities even if it's due to luck. And then if we rank countries according to the number of meritocratic people, we see that it's not true that Scandinavian countries or European countries more generally are not meritocratic. They are really meritocratic. So you see them up here, typically. Countries who would not have so many meritocratic people would rather be non-European or non-OECD countries, if you want. Those countries would typically then have much more libertarian people, and the share of egalitarian is smaller and in all countries. Okay, so I should wrap up. So let me be quick on the belief side. We see that it's not that people in general believe that hard work and abilities, the merit factors, would be those driving inequalities. Luck and seems to be sort of believed to be a more important source of inequality. And we don't need to discuss heterogeneity. So let me just say that both preferences and beliefs seems to be self-serving in the sense that if you look at the merit versus luck treatment effects, those with higher income, those with higher education would tend to be more responsive to the merit treatment versus the luck treatment. And also on the belief side, higher income people tend to believe that merit is a more important source of inequality than luck. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to show is how the policy attitudes would relate to beliefs and preferences. So the conceptual framework you could think about is that the extent to which you find inequality in your society unfair affects your support for redistribution. And both your fairness preferences and beliefs would affect to what extent you find inequality in your own society unfair. So let's look at this in turn. So whether you think inequality in your own country is unfair is both related to the preferences in the way you would expect and to the beliefs. So I know this is very quick, but this is what this table shows. Then you can relate whether you think inequality is unfair, whether that relates to your support to governmental policies. And it does relate very strongly to your support. So if for the question, national government should aim to reduce economic differences between rich and poor, it does relate strongly and significantly to whether you find inequality in your own country to be unfair, even if you control for beliefs, incentives, and confidence in governments and in your own income rank. Okay, so then I have the summary, but that's fine. I think if I understand the organizers correctly, you want me to wrap up here, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Anthony, I think there's a question, there's a hand up, so maybe you can start there and we can go from there.
Yes, thank you, Ingvild. We have a few minutes for Q&A, and then those who would like to ask a discussion, the Zoom room has been posted on the chat. But Alejandro, please go ahead and mute yourself and ask your question.
No, sorry, you already asked my question for me before, so I don't have another one. That's
okay, your hand was up. All right.
Oh, sorry about that. Mistake.
Nicholas, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, basically my question was why or what's the rationale underlying to have innate abilities as part or a source that relates to meritocracy and not to luck? Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Should I respond immediately or should I? Yeah, can I respond now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So this is of course an excellent question in the sense that you could think about two sort of extreme positions. So the libertarian, where you accept all inequalities, egalitarian, accepting no inequalities. You could think about many mid positions where you, for example, would like to hold people responsible for their efforts, but not their talent or whatever they're born with, whatever their parents helped them read and all of that when they were young. And sometimes we call that mid position that I think you may have in mind as a liberal egalitarian position. So typically when we define the meritocratic position, we think about productivity being a justification, productivity differences being a justification, or merit differences being a justification for inequality. I do agree with you, though, that we could, of course, define this merit. It's more a label in our approach than anything else, right? So we can relate it to the literature and philosophy, but of course, there are different ways you could define a meritocratic position.
Okay. There is a question from Abraham. I will just read it. Is there a plan to interchange the participants? The beliefs and preferences may differ when one is a spectator and otherwise.
Sorry, can you read it again? I just didn't get it.
Abraham is asking, is there a plan to interchange the participants? The beliefs and preferences may differ when one is a spectator and otherwise.
Yeah. So this is a question. So we didn't do it in this study, but there are other studies who would look at fairness preferences and compare if you're a spectator or a stakeholder in the decision-making, whether preferences differ. And then, of course, you could then in the utility function I showed you would also have self-interest for the stakeholders, right? So, and you could estimate that model using a discrete choice model. It has been done, it's a paper in AR doing that for fairness preferences, and it shows no difference when you do act as a spectator and you do act as a stakeholder. Of course, there are differences in choices, right? Because you have another motive when you're a spectator, which is your self-interest. But what you find to be fair and how much weight you put on fairness relative to other things seem to not change when you're a stakeholder and spectator. So that's kind of what we're resting on here, saying, okay, they show that, so we can use the spectator design here.
Two more. Anna, you had a question, and then we will have a Garance. Anna Fava. Anna?
Anthony, I think she's Anna's not with us anymore, but it's probably a question
Okay.
many people find interesting. So I'll read the question.
Okay,
So
please. I lost the internet at some point, so
yeah,
I can't
that's
see
okay.
it.
So there's a question related to the previous one. In fact, this kind of how do you want us to think about intergenerational? So when you think of the causes of inequality, do you think of people considering low intergenerational mobility as being born in rich families, being luck of merit? Or I guess more, I had a related question, kind of how do you want us to think in this setting of any kind of inequality? You know, part of the literature talks about inequality of opportunity, including potential human capital. And as it relates to the first part of your presentation, that seems to be a relevant part of the puzzle here.
Yeah, so again, of course, there are many nuances we don't have here in this study, but I do find it extremely interesting what you ask. And there are some, I forget names, but there are at least one PhD students, maybe two in Zurich, who are currently working on this issue, like how you think about inheritance, for example, but that's of course the financial part of what you get from your parents. I don't have the answer exactly to how people think about luck, but what is true is that for sure the productivity differences would capture anything that affect your productivity, right? So which neighborhood you grew up in, which school you went to, there were so many things put into that basket, which means that we cannot really say anything about how they would make distinctions between what innate ability would as a source and more sort of effort choices. And it's an extremely interesting question. There are some new papers on this, which sort of partly at least discuss this issue. And what we see, it's Peter Andres' job market paper from 2 years back, I believe, which is called Shallow Meritocracy, would suggest that actually it seems like people care more about the productivity differences today than how they came about. So even in cases where you're forced to make choices that leads to less productivity, I apologize if I cite him wrong now, but this is how I read his paper. Even if you're forced into that, more or less, people will hold you accountable. So they would accept inequalities due because it's merit. So it seems like we should do more research on this, but it seems to be very strong, this merit argument, that even if there are things leading to that merit difference that you couldn't yourself choose to get out of, people would still find inequalities because of those merit differences justifiable.
Thank you. Garance?
Yes, thank you for a very interesting talk. A question regarding, like, you call it tolerance for inequality. Do you think that there's also something about you being responsible for the allocation of others, that, you know, there's a sense in which it's a bit playing God, no? You're there and your response, it's kind of different from voting for how much redistribution you would have in society. You're there, you have two random workers, and you're going to be responsible for taking from one to the other. And I think there's a little bit of maybe associated with religion, or associated, like, you need to be pretty bold to want to change the fate of those two people by your own decision. And I kind of wonder whether, you know, religion in which you would more accept your fate or this or that would just to make sure that it's not, the conclusion should not necessarily be only that 40% of the people are comfortable with the inequality, but there would be something that would, like, you know, also affect me in my decision.
Yes, and I think we can partly study that in the sense that we can look at how what you reveal by your behavior in the experiment would relate to your policy preferences more generally, right? Yes. So how fair you find the inequality in your own country to be, and also how that relates to your support for government policies. So I do think that's a very good point, and we could look at that. Also, we have a paper with a PhD student, Udasun, where we relate religion. So I think that's a very good point, that it could very well be related to religion. But of course, we should discuss it in the way you say as well. Like, would that then affect sort of what you do when you're put in that position may also differ from what you would vote for the government to do. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we thank you very much, Ingvild, for the presentation. We very much appreciate. The next seminar will be on November 5th, when we shall host Professor Asad Islam from Monash University. The Zoom room is on the chat. So if you'd like to discuss more, please join the Zoom room and discuss a little bit more. And thank you very much. See you on November 5th. I beg your pardon. Thank you.